for our beliefs, has there? You know, there is so much happening at the moment that is not right in the world, and taking a stand on those and being really clear on what it is we believe should happen is quite critical. And I think at the same stage, there's this real tension around fear at the moment. So uncertainty, really not knowing what is happening, being worried about what's happening. And I think that always creates a bit of a tension between how we want to stand up for what we believe in, and that fear which breeds scarcity, and which sometimes breeds, you know, sort of, we become quite segregated and become more in survival mode and more around ourselves. So we're going to look today at values with a work focus, because there's amazing events happening globally around all sorts of aspects of the resilience, including Stephen, who I think started in from Brisbane, who's running one this evening. We're going to focus on work today and look at the intersection of resilience and values with a work lens. Let's just have a look at how we see that fitting in. So our specialty in terms of our resilience at work community, which is being represented today by resilience.tv, which is our community website where we post lots of content which is around resilience at work. I guess we've always known that values are really critical for resilience. And I've mentioned why values are really important at the moment, but if we think about why resilience is important, it doesn't matter what job we're in or where we live at the moment, we're all in that state, aren't we, where we're really looking at how do we actually take on the challenges that we have at the moment? How do we manage those? But how do we also address the reality, but also have this sense of hope and optimism around what's going to be at the other end and what we might need to do to adapt and be proactive? And so we've been, for the last 10 years, looking at what that looks like at work. And we've developed this model called the Resilience at Work model, and it's 7 components that attribute to resilience. But the one that we're going to be focusing on today, of course, is the values piece, which we call living authentically. So in our research, we've known for a long time that values, and in particular values misalignment, has an enormous impact on how we can show up at work, how we manage what's happening for us, how we adapt, and how we plan and be proactive about our career. And I'm sure that many of you have been in roles where there's just been this whole values disconnect. Perhaps you lack transparency and it's not there. Perhaps you believe in care and the care's not there. Whether it's from your teams, whether it's from your leadership, or whether it's from the organisation, we constantly find that the values disconnect will force people to exit if they can. Otherwise, we describe it as sort of losing your soul. So resilience and values generally in life, of course, are really important, but we're going to focus on what that looks like in the workplace. When we live out, what values do we need to be living, and what values at the moment are being threatened, I guess, by what's going on. So how we're going to do this is we did a global survey, and thank you for those who have participated in that. And we looked at 4 levels of values. We looked at a personal level, what are people doing? We looked at a team level, what are people doing? We looked at a leadership level around what people expect of leadership. And we looked at an organizational level. What is it that we are wanting our organizations to step up to right now? I mean, we're hearing so much more around corporate responsibility and sort of it being pretty non-negotiable that they invest in sustainability and transparency. So what does it look like for an organization to be relevant and survive in this new environment that we have? And I guess we've always seen resilience as needing those alignments, you know. So if we're going to have a workforce that's resilient, we need to invest in ourselves, but we need to invest collectively. we need to invest in our leadership, and we need to invest in the organisation, and we need that alignment right across the board. So that's what we're going to be exploring today, are the results of 2 actual surveys. The first was we did some mini polls on LinkedIn, and so the mini polls, those of you who've done a poll on LinkedIn, it's a forced choice. You can only say, you know, pick one. So we'll show you that the mini polls. So they're quite interesting because they just give you a sense of, if you're forced to choose which value, which one it is. And then we'll show you the larger survey, which, as I said, is about the values that we're thinking are important at each of those levels. And interestingly, we also looked at what gets in the way of living those values at the moment. Because while we want to step up, the factors that actually stop us stepping up are increasing, of course, as well at the moment. So in the chat, Sharon, where have we got people calling in from? Have people put that in?
Yes, we have from USA, Canada and Australia. So Adelaide and Brisbane. And I think that is all.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome all. So before we get started, I'm keen for people to come off mute and talk. We've got a small enough group that will allow that, recognising we're recording. So just if there's anything you don't want to share, please let us know. So before we start, I'd be really interested in what values you are bringing to the session today. And I think for me, I'm bringing a curiosity around where people are at the moment with how they're thinking about that. And I guess I'm also bringing value of collaboration, because this is very much how do we work together to address some of these things that are fundamental in the world and in the world of work. So does anyone want to share one value that they're bringing to the session today, just as a check-in? Just come off mute and fire away.
Hi, Stephen here from Brisbane.
Hi.
Thanks very much, Kathryn, for kickstarting World Values Day in Australia. It's fantastic. I'm bringing the value of adventure. I'm always interested to learn something new and meet new people from all corners of the globe. So that's the value that I'm bringing today.
Thank you. And Stephen's running a session this evening, as I mentioned. So is there time to register for that as well, Stephen, or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Most welcome, most welcome.
So go into LinkedIn and find his profile there. And it's going to be a forum, so it'll be really interesting. Anyone else want to dive in?
I'm probably bringing the curiosity value in as well. I've only just recently been exposed to the resilience at work model. And I have an assignment due on it next week. So I am looking forward to getting some good pointers that I can present to my class.
Thanks, Grace. So definitely a transactional thing happening there. We might take it. Alona, are you putting your hand up?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, similarly, the curiosity, but the word that keeps coming to mind today is perspective and connection.
Yeah.
Because I think, particularly in the COVID-19 environment, the thing that's really coming up at a personal work level is perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's really strong for me, particularly with people at different life stages, and they're really being asked to sort of, sit back and think about, what are their values and how are they living their values? And is it time to, reduce that gap between what I'm doing and what I really feel strongly about? So that perspective taking and being able to sort of step back. So
I reckon that's a real trend at the moment, isn't it, Alona, around people in transition because of that, reflecting on, do I take early retirement? Do I reinvent myself? Do I take a sea change? And a large part of that is whether or not you have the job security and the place to be able to do that from. But I think you're right. I think it's been an enormous period, particularly when a lot of people are in the early days in lockdown, which I know some of you are still quite restricted in your movements. We've had that reflective space. We haven't necessarily had to do that, have we? So that perspective is great. Might take one more before we launch into the session results.
Got a few on the chat, Kath.
Yeah, oh, great. Thank you.
We've got Nancy who says optimism.
Yeah.
Anne, learning and curiosity. And SW, caring, show care.
Yeah, and you'll see all of those play out. And I think the optimism is a really interesting one. So a lot of the research that I've been following at the moment is saying that we have to actually, you know, whether it's business survival or our own survival, we have to be really clear on the reality. You know, we don't sugarcoat the reality of what we're dealing with, but we have to keep that hope and optimism. And I guess if there's anything a leader needs to hold at the moment, it's that, isn't it? So we'll see this play out a little bit in a moment when we look at the results. So let's just start. So as I said, we have these polls. So we're going to do personal values first. We have this little poll. And they're not, you know, I think we had an average of about 45 votes. So it's not like, none of this is definitive. None of the results are definitive. It's really about, for this session, it's about a reflection and as Ilona said, about a perspective on some of the things that are happening at the moment. So this is the piece around the personal. So we asked people, how are you showing up? You know, so when you're thinking about how you're showing up, remember this is at work, what is it that you are focusing on at the moment? And then we're asking, what gets in the way of that? Because I think anyone can show up in the right circumstances, but the test becomes how you show up when the rubber hits the road, isn't it? And so we can see here that the flexibility and the resourcefulness are things that people are showing up and focusing on more than the gratitude, which I found quite interesting because we're hearing a lot about gratitude at the moment. But I wonder whether the perspective on that is through the other graph, which is about what our leaders expect and job insecurity and our colleague behaviours. So if we are worried about our job, if we have expectations that we're trying to meet, then I guess it's flexibility and resourcefulness that come to the fore. I think, has anyone got any comments on that before I show you the next piece of the survey? When you look at that, what comes to mind for you in terms of what you're seeing playing out in your workplaces and around you and the people you work with? So we do have quite a few coaches on the line here, so you'll be working with a number of organisations. Ilona, yeah?
I'm just looking at the flexibility within the context of the uncertainty. And so people are really, the given is that we don't know what's next. You know, globally, we're, you know, every day is a new day, and the need to be flexible to be able to still function, and that's the one there that you know, comes to mind, that's within the context of the uncertainty, that if not doing that, then that's really going to sort of you know, affect people's ability to cope with the situation.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you'll see when we go to the teams, how that plays out in a team as well. So this is about saying, you know, it's uncertain, I need to be flexible. Resourcefulness comes in there too, doesn't it? Because being flexible is also a little bit about doing things differently and being a bit more resourceful. Anyone else? The colleague behaviours were quite interesting in that clearly what you're seeing your colleagues and peers do is, you know, they're saying here, threatens my values. So what do you think might be playing out there?
What's the actual percentage there? I can't get my people off that.
Oh, you can't get rid of them. 48% Ilona. So, you know, there's job security 32, leader 21, but colleague behaviours are actually the highest. So we're actually saying that in trying to stand up for my own values at the moment, my colleague behaviours are getting in the way. So whether it's that they're not pulling their weight as much as I am, and so why should I be flexible because they're not? Whether it's they are focusing on their own needs, so why should I be resourceful and be grateful when they're not grateful? You know, so it's again an intersection. But let's move to the next one.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
What comes to mind then is the word compassion. So everybody perhaps, you know, because clearly when people get tense and uptight and stressed, our focus narrows and we become more internalized.
Yes.
And so that the importance of, well, while I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with, I need to have that perhaps compassion and understanding that others are too, even though at times they might annoy me,
Yes.
because I'm going through it and I need compassion too. So that's the word that comes.
Absolutely, and you'll see that play out shortly in the results, in that people are wanting more care, they're wanting more support, which means we need to have more compassion and more gratitude at the same time as being under the pump ourselves. Yeah.
Kathryn, it's Sylvia.
Sorry?
I was just going to add to that. And
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I was just going to add to that and say, you know, I think workplaces are being more flexible in these times, but not sure if they're reducing the number of or the amount of work that people have. So they talk about being flexible. Yes, work from home, have time with your kids, take an extra lunch break, things like that. But doesn't necessarily mean that you have less work. So then does that reflect on others to say that they think that your behavior is bad because you're not doing enough? Although that, you know, we're trying to be flexible, yet there's not enough focus on saying, well, what does that mean for the work that still needs to be done?
Yeah, and I guess there's different versions of flexibility, isn't there? There's flexibility around workload, there's flexibility about where you're working, there's flexibility about the duties you have to do or the role you take on. So there's all sorts of versions of that. But I'm certainly seeing, particularly in Australia, as people are coming back to the workplace, back to face-to-face, flexibility actually becoming a real source of tension in teams where, you know, I'm coming back, they're not, they should be, you know, so it's going to be quite interesting how that plays out and how organizations are going to balance that flexibility with the accountability and expectations. So this one here is about the values you're focusing on at work at the moment. So this is the broader survey that we did, which was not a poll. It was a survey that you went on and you did, and you did all of them. So I think the trouble with polls is you're filling in, you know, you're choosing 3 values, you know, in isolation, and it is a forced choice, which is interesting in itself. But this is the survey, and again, it was promoted through LinkedIn and networks. So we could expect it's people who are working, it's predominantly people in professional and semi-professional roles who are filling this in. But, you know, 58% of people are saying, well, look, I'm trying to act with integrity at the moment. But look at the 35% is exactly what Lona was just saying, is that people are trying to, at the moment, focus on being kind, caring for others, and being empathetic and fair, and the teamwork and collaboration, being accepting, being collaborating. So if we were to collapse the compassion, fairness, collaboration, and acceptance, which is sort of a care, you know, we've got quite a high percentage of people saying at the moment, at least they're trying to focus on that. So exactly what Alona was saying. And I'll just go to the next one, and then I'll throw it open to observations and comments, because this is really interesting, because these are the threats and the fear we would expect. Okay, so people are finding that it's a lot harder to stand up and be flexible, offer compassion, be authentic, because they're worried about, they're fearful about what's going to happen. Will their health be compromised? Will their income security? Will they face failure? That scarcity, that breeds fear. But interestingly, the next one is about energy. So I don't know about you, but I certainly find myself far more grumpy at the moment than I normally would be. So, you know, I'd like to think I'm caring, but actually sometimes I'm a little less tolerant than I normally would be, because, hey, you know, there's so much going on and there's so much setbacks. And I've had this conversation with so many people recently, and they said, oh, you know, I thought I was going okay, but I'm just getting a bit fed up. Is anyone experiencing that? Is anyone experiencing here that the energy that is diminished by workload, deadline, setbacks, things happening in your life are starting to make it a little bit harder to show up? Is anyone finding that, or is that just me and the people I talk to?
No, definitely. I'm in Melbourne. I'm in lockdown still.
Oh.
And, you know, I actually didn't want to get out of bed this morning. It's, I haven't really experienced it all that often, but there's just times where you sit there and go, the deadlines are always going to be there. And every time you get through one, there just seems to be another one. And with all the time, I'm in business continuity. So therefore, you know, there's always one thing after another and plans to update. So you just sit there and go, if I just stayed in bed today, would it really matter? Because tomorrow will be another day.
Is that Sylvia? Is it? Because I can't see.
It is.
Yeah. Hi, Sylvia. Good to see
Hello,
you.
how are you?
Or hear you. I can't see you on the gallery. But you know, I'm wondering. I did a little YouTube on this the other day because sometimes I think we're just fed up of being optimistic and positive all the time, and sometimes we want to be miserable. You know, we just want to have some, you know, doing a day where we just regroup and we focus on it's crap and it's awful, but we do it in what I'd call a bounded misery, you know. So we say we're just going to do it for the afternoon and then we're going to re-emerge. We stopped talking about time management now, haven't we? We started to talk about energy management. How do we actually manage this energy, you know, balance all this negativity with the need to show up and be optimistic? And so, Sylvia, I think, right, you know, some days we just can't do it, and that's definitely a compromise, not necessarily of our values, but a temporary inability to stand up, maybe, I think. Anyone else want to comment on any of these things that they agree that, gosh, that is at the moment getting in the way of me being who I normally would like to be? Energy is definitely mine. Anyone else want to comment?
I wanted to comment on the energy bit because I think it's the relentless nature that, we talked about hope and optimism, and you're right, you sort of think the light is at the end of the tunnel. And I have many friends and colleagues in Melbourne, I'm in Adelaide, and, talking to them, they're beginning to talk about being on a slippery slope and sliding. And that's because, they've sort of thought there was an end in sight. Oh, but here we go again. And so you bring everything to that first stage and they have to keep going. And many of them working from home, so we tested this, where there's the workload and the deadlines, but also you're in the family home often with young children. So the work and family get really close, and I can't get out and do the things that nurture and energize me, like go for a walk or a swim or connect the relationship side, connect with others. And the variant or the variability in people's experience of our current state is quite interesting too.
Absolutely. I mean, some people are loving it because they're relatively in touch, that they haven't got all those dilemmas that you're talking about with children at home and various things. I mean, so I think it's easy to say that this is bad for everyone. Some people are doing really okay. But you're right, Alona, that we've got hope. This is the goal, but then the goal disappears, and then we've got to regroup, re-energize, and we've got to go for the goal again, and the goalposts keep shifting. And so how you regroup and how you manage your energy has become a really, really interesting, difficult thing, I think. Is anyone else here from Melbourne today? Just Sylvia? Well, thank you for getting out of bed for us, Sylvia. All right, let's move on to teams, because, at the end of the day, as a team, we're individuals and how we show up as individuals have a huge impact on the team, but also how we invest in the team has a big impact as well, doesn't it? So, we talk a lot in resilience around taking accountability for how we show up, but also being willing to look at the collective and what we need to do together. So being accountable for the group as well as for ourselves. And you'll start to see some real patterns emerging here. And this isn't definitive, it's really about having a reflection and having a thinking about what this looks like at the moment. So team. So the poll. Which of the team values best promote resilience? And it's quite interesting that we had flexibility and resourcefulness as what we were stepping up to, with gratitude a third. Adaptability is what people are saying here is what we need to be focusing on. Generosity and optimism as well, but that being adaptable, so tying into that flexibility. And I probably set the second poll up not terribly well, because I think it's fairly obvious that trust. Trust, once trust is gone, sometimes it never comes back, and it can be broken really easily. And I'm seeing lots of examples at the moment where things have happened, where people are withdrawing because they feel they can't trust. And so, whereas we would have expected support and accountability to be high, I think the fact that trust is overwhelmingly the choice is probably why it's so strong. I mean, what do you read into that, anyone? That maybe more the trust is the obvious one, but maybe more of the promotion of values. What do you read into the adaptability scoring much higher than the generosity and optimism on this?
I just wanted to make a comment first around the trust. What I found, particularly with working from home as organisations send all of their employees home and that whole transition, the first thing that many people I spoke to noticed was micromanaging. Yeah. Because the managers weren't used to this whole scenario, and it was about controlling rather than working with their team. And you could see how much damage that was causing. Within teams. So I think the context initially really affected that in terms of bringing trust up, and really highlighted that that when you're not with each other and you don't have all of those water cooler moments and tea breaks and coffee breaks and all of those things that go on, and building community and social bonding in the physical workplace, it really emphasises that particular value around trust.
Yeah, and I mean, I even heard an example of someone saying the manager was expecting them to keep the Zoom camera on all day to make sure they were working. So we had some extremes. And then at the other end, of course, we were hearing people who were saying, my manager's largely absent, because they were maybe at home with the kids and the school things and the aging parents in care homes that they couldn't access, and, a variety of personal things going on. So we heard at one end, the micromanaging, and at the other end, so consumed with their own issues and trying to regroup everything that they were almost, absent. But yeah, that's a very, very good observation, I think. And of course, that's still in a way is still playing out, because I've worked with an organisation the other day where they said everyone's coming back to work because we're more productive. And so that what's the code there? Well, we don't trust you to do it. And then the broader survey, yeah. So again, we've got trust and honesty right at the top of what promotes, but look how much the collaboration and compassion and support is playing out. So I'm really surprised here that it's not about innovation, creativity, because this is the workplace. And yes, we need compassion and care, but if that's not balanced with recreating, and I've had a number of conversations recently where people are saying, I really think we're losing the opportunities that we had to innovate. So I don't discount the compassion, care, and collaboration and connection, because we want to connect because we're isolated. We want to feel we're together. We want people to care for us. But I'm just wondering if other people are seeing that the adaptability, innovation piece getting lost a bit. It's just an observation. What do people think?
It's Delaney here, and yeah, I can see where you're going with that for sure. It's a great question, and at the same time, I think, well, what supports a team's ability to be innovative, creative, is having the trust in place, knowing that ideas are being respected, listened to, having a good capacity for collaboration, you know, which involves working together, right? You know, shooting ideas around the table, that creative. So I wonder if, you know, these values actually are really important, that they're the foundation on which you can build, you know, innovation, creativity, accountability from. If you don't have the trust in place, those other things don't necessarily get to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Do you
so
think?
what you're saying is they're an enabler. I mean, if we don't have
Yeah.
a sense of cooperation and care, and how can we work together to do things differently? We need to trust that we can do those things. A really, really good point. Yeah. So without that, innovation and creativity and adaptability don't happen. Yeah. So great observation. Anyone else want to comment on that? I think that's brilliant.
Kathryn, it's Sylvia. I think, you know, we've had to be adaptive. With COVID, there hasn't been a choice. We've all been, you know, thrust into working from home, some longer than others.
Yeah.
And that you have to, almost if you didn't want to, you've had no choice but to sit there and trust that your team are going to do the work.
Yeah.
It still needs to be done whether you're in the office or not. And we've done a study and we're piloting in New Zealand of return to work because they're a bit ahead of us. But it actually shows that we won't return to a full work from the office because productivity was, if not the same, better from home, allowing our workers to be more flexible. And you know, there's a 1 hour free zone that's mandatory across the business to say you must spend time with the family or go for a walk during this period. Obviously, there's some variances for people on the phone and things like that, but they have to find an hour a day where they log off. And so I think we've been thrust into this whole new way of working where trust now has to be given at the front, and then I guess taketh away if the person is not, you know, fulfilling their obligations. But it's been thrust upon us. Adaptability. We've had to be more innovative because you know, some people couldn't work from home before. I know we didn't have the capability to take customer calls from home. We've now made that happen. So we've had to be innovative to take web call, you know, web forms and digital e-commerce. Are we where we wanted to be? We probably should have been there in the first place.
Yes.
But it's made us do it very quickly, you know, 2 years worth of work in 3 months or something. It shows how fast people can, you know, adapt and do things and be resilient.
Yeah, nothing like a crisis to get people to do that stuff. So you're saying it happened anyway, but it's the care. I mean, I'm also hearing that the organisation is investing in understanding and care about family life now. And I've heard that a few times recently where
absolutely
organisations are saying, right, we're going to have this, we're going to do that. So they're focusing a lot more on making sure people are looked after, which is really good. Let's just now quickly move on to then the values conflict. And again, you know, trust is the obvious one, but the other theme that came out quite high was the personal versus team orientation getting in the way of whether or not you were engaging in the values that you felt were important in a team. So people being very self-centered, competition status. So that reinforces that sense of collaboration and connectedness, doesn't it? So we need the collaboration and connectedness. And so when people do things that are against that are around themselves, then we're seeing that more impacting on our resilience. Has anyone got an example of where they think that the team has been fractured by self-centered behaviour or perhaps lack of transparency or even accountability? I thought accountability and work ethic would show up higher because I'm hearing quite a lot around concern around people not necessarily, you know, people having excuses not to pull their weight. Has anyone got any comments on any of those? Example of any of those work conflicts, values conflicts showing out?
I think, this is Sarah, I think something that I've seen where I'm at now is we have, you know, there's about half of us working from home now, and there are some that had the option to work from home but chose not to.
Yeah.
And yes, sorry, I'm driving with children. and but anyway, so we've got a couple that chose not to work from home, and they're almost holding themselves on a pedestal, like they're better than those of us who agreed to work from home. And that fractures the
Yeah.
team a lot. There's a lot of insinuating that we can't be doing our jobs as well if we're not there
Yeah.
every single day.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other one I've seen is the people who, this is a comment not necessarily from managers but teams, people who never pulled their weight anyway now have the mother of all excuses not to. So, you know, it's interesting. Anyway, we won't delve into that, but it's certainly, that's a great example, Sarah, I think. Aisha.
I've got a message, Kath, from Nancy saying that trust covers accountability.
Yes, true, because you trust in people to deliver. So absolutely, you're right. That's part of accountability.
And
as
another
well.
one from Rachel saying, I was in a team and job cuts were required. Some team members were really putting others down to make themselves look better.
Yeah, that's what scarcity is, again, isn't it? When we're in competition with others, I don't think we can underestimate what we do, you know, because if it's my survival versus your survival, we like to think that we're caring, compassionate, generous, and have integrity, but I mean, we really don't know until we're in that circumstance, do we?
Kathryn, is that a good example? Is that Trump putting down
yeah.
Biden at the moment? For all our American listeners, I think he's doing a very good job of, you know, that last thing that we just saw this morning of him putting his face on and instead of putting, you know, resident instead of president in an old aged, you know, I think that's a great example of you know, ethic and you know, putting people down to get the job.
Yes, yes. So we don't worry about personal integrity because what we worry about is whether we're going to win. And if that means we discount our colleagues and, you know, make sure we look better than them, well, that's okay, because the only aim is to win the role, win the election, win the whatever. So I really think fear has been a real factor in creating scarcity and self-interest in a lot of ways as well. So the leadership, again, these are the false choices, but again, what are we seeing? We're seeing appreciation, compassion. I've certainly, you know, in terms of the value breach side of the poll, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing that leaders who didn't stand up and show appreciation, care, and compassion are are in a little bit of trouble in terms of their team leadership as they come out of COVID. Has anyone got an example of that where people didn't step up to the compassion and care? And you know, maybe Steve's example around not trusting and driving and expecting accountability, and now they're in a position where the teams are really not with them and not engaged with them. Has anyone got an example of that? No? Okay.
I'll share, Kathryn. It sort of fits that. Just recently talking to someone I know, a friend who's a vice principal, and their district superintendent, you know, now that, I mean, it's a real mess, right? Getting kids back to school here where we are, because we'd closed the schools down in the spring and then sort of reemerged. And it's just been difficult because every district is handling it slightly differently. The province is mandating, but they aren't. But in this particular district, you know, the problem was the leader at the district level, you know, made some decisions for expediency and has really caused a lot of strife amongst, because they feel that their very safety and the safety of their schools have now been put at risk. And so I think, you know, that was an example of I think just what you were asking, just, you know, where the team, somebody becomes, they've been off not really managing the whole mess, and then they come in as the leader again, saying, well, now we're all going to get together. Well, and I think it was just sort of, well, where were you when we really needed you? And here you are now showing up in ways that make us feel unsafe, and put schools at risk. And so right there, I was hearing in her voice just a real loss of faith, and feeling like she was swimming against the current, trying to keep her students safe, which is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Yeah.
Beautiful example. Where were you when we needed you? I like that piece.
I have an interesting sort of opposite of that. At the beginning of COVID, I was hosting quite a few conversations in New Zealand with respect to chambers of commerce and localized conversations. And what I was really noticing, that people's expectations in New Zealand was that the leaders of their organizations to step up. And what I was seeing, that a lot of that was happening, and they were seeing that they had 38 employees, but they had a family of 100 that they had to look after. And so that was really impacting on their ability to look forward and out of that, because they were feeling that their leaders were really stepping up to the plate. So when they were thinking about the next steps, everybody was contributing to those next steps because they'd been looked after, really looked after. It was amazing to see. And this was in a couple of different districts in New Zealand.
Yes, so it's almost like the goodwill, the capital of goodwill you'd invested in, so people then are willing to step up with you and plan. And as Delaney said early on, the compassion and the care meant that you could innovate and you were collaborating together. But if you were absent, like the other example, well then you're really in trouble to then lead. And let's have a look at the others. So the values leaders need to demonstrate to promote resilience. Well, again, authenticity, honesty, trust, pretty much will always come up the top, won't they? But again, look, compassion, listening, flexibility, fairness, being vulnerable themselves. So just another total endorsement of that, the care and being there and walking with you on the journey was really important. And the breaches, let's just go to the breaches. Again, trust at the top, but the transparency and openness. And again, I think some of the research that's coming out around leadership is, as a leader, you need to tell the truth. You don't sugarcoat, you say the reality. And I wonder at the beginning whether there was a little bit of a protection around that. We better not tell people that we might not be in business next week. We better not do this, we better not do that. And what we actually know about resilience is that protecting people is not good. You need to tell them the truth, but work with them with the optimism and the plan and the hope. So I think it's quite interesting around that. And the disconnection from the team or reality. So again, that feeds into what I was just saying, is blind optimism. And then, of course, we've got, not valuing, belittling, and the usual types of behaviour that are problematic. But the transparency and openness and self-interest are quite interesting. Please comment. Yeah,
Kathryn. So reminded of the previous slides where I think it was around the teams, where communication actually was only 7%. And normally that's, top of the pops with, the trust. I guess in line with what you're talking about now. I mean, without the communication, there can't be transparency and openness. And then it's about how do you communicate the bad news within the, in the bubble of optimism. But it is that reality. And I think that's sort of what's been really, I think people have valued that, and so I'm surprised that the communication wasn't a little bit higher, because that's how you hear what is the current state of play. Because of course, what we're good at is creating stories when we don't have information. It's usually negative.
And I think the next one talks about, the breaches talk about consistent messaging, actually. I think, maybe it's
Kathryn,
not one, but yeah.
Do you mind if I just make one more comment?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Back in early 2001, when there was the Enron crisis, which impacted everywhere across the world, and we were running a series of values and actions conversations through the Hunter Valley in Newcastle. And what I was noting there was that the values that came up the highest on their list that was really important to them was honesty, integrity, and trust. The top three that you've got on your list. And so I'm wondering about the connection between crisis and the amplification of these particular values. I'm sure that they're important all of the time, but I think that potentially these crises of confidence may amplify these values.
I think you're absolutely right. People have no appetite for spin. They want to know the reality, the truth. They want to know that they're hearing all the truth. They're wanting consistent messaging around it. And I think we'll see that play out in a moment when we look at the organizational stuff. But yeah, I mean, you know, this it's a crisis, but now it's become a way of living as well. So whether, you know, our hope is that that goes from how people behave in a crisis to how they always behave. So transparency and honesty and, you know, no spin is what people now need to hear from their leaders. It's what they want from their organizations, as opposed to, all right, well, right now, because we're in a crisis, we need to be really careful that we do this. But really, really lovely observation. And I think in terms of resilience, I think we need to be moving from a sense of resilience is about, you know, a crisis that we go through and we rebound from. We need to be saying the new reality of a setback, uncertainty. So it's a different way of framing. Not that I ever saw it any different anyway, because work was always every day, you know, challenges, not the major, you know, restructures and things. But will be really interesting, exactly as you say, whether the new expectations, you know, beyond crisis will happen. So let's, we've got 10 minutes. So
Kathryn, this is Anne.
Yeah, Anne, hi.
Hi. May I make a comment here? I know that you're moving through, but I've watched, particularly, you know, we see it nationally and internationally, and particularly in the medical world, there are a lot of leaders who have incredible integrity and honesty and have great trust of their teams and groups. But particularly COVID and the uncertainties, even the uncertainty during the crisis and the really frustrating doldrums that we're kind of in now, if people don't have the ability to communicate uncertainty in a compassionate but very direct fashion, if they find it difficult to find the language, and if they find it difficult themselves to cope with the uncertainty, then it can appear as if people are not transparent or open when they really want to be. The vast majority of doctors in my experience, including myself, we're much happier with absolute certainty. That's why we go into things where we continually striving to be better and better and better, because the uncertainty can be very difficult to handle. And I think some of the lack of transparency that we're experiencing just translates to difficulty with the tools of communication.
And so when I'm hearing you talk, and I'm thinking that, you know, maybe for all, you know, we've talked about emotional intelligence, for example, for a long time, maybe all leaders are going to have to be better at the way in which they communicate in emotional situations, in uncertain situations, and better able to do the empathy care piece as well as the problem solving piece. So again, it'll be quite interesting how our leadership programs evolve. And
it's interesting to watch leaders who don't pay the slightest bit of attention to other leaders who are doing very well. I mean, anyone can look at Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand or Bonnie Henry here in British Columbia and think, oh, I'm going to copy that because that works.
Absolutely. And, you know, Jacinda, you know, totally authentic, and it is what it is, and know what we call in Australia bullshit. So many things we don't know yet as to what the lasting impact's going to be here. So lastly, organisational values. I'll pop through a little bit quickly so we can have a time just for some reflection. Here we are, we're wanting transparency and care, no surprise. And what should they demonstrate most to stay resilient? Flexibility. So not ingenuity and vision, which is what we might have seen previously. You know, organisations who are resilient are the ones who are leading the way in terms of disrupting the market and having, you know, creative, amazing off-the-planet ideas and a vision. Flexibility. So all of this is a reinforcement really of what we've said. So I'll just show you the last of the slides and then we can have a chat. What should they demonstrate? Here we go. Transparency, honesty, trust. Be truthful. Say it as it is. Don't spin. Be compassionate. And again, innovation lower, but as you know, as we talked about, you know, compassion and adaptability and integrity are possibly an enabler for people to come on the journey of the innovation. And see purpose, you know, again, you know, I would have thought we would have, you know, previously, you know, the purpose would have been a little bit more up there. And then let's look at breaches and then let's have a last conversation. Integrity, okay, so, and again, I mean, we're seeing so many interesting examples, aren't we, where people are being held up for a lack of integrity, you know, whether it's the financial sector or whatever it might be, or, you know, directors of boards or really important, but again, compassion, transparency, you know, the integrity is the big thing. So I just asked this last question. So if you were advising organizations right now around, from a corporate point of view, what the values should make sure they include, because I think, you know, we've had corporate values around since the 80s, haven't we, where, you know, everyone then had the value statements on the wall, and then we've had the corporate social responsibility. Everyone's felt that they've had to have a, you know, corporate social responsibility plan, you know, and this is what we're about, and we're all about community and we're about sustainability, etc. So if we were to think of this changing landscape, having had this conversation today, what do you think are some things that organisations cannot afford to exclude right now to be viable?
It's almost like a hierarchy of needs, isn't it? During a crisis, and people go back to, and if there's no psychological safety, then how can people move forward? Yeah.
So, you know, sorry, yeah, Alona, you're going to comment on.
Build on Sharon's, that's where my head was going. So the previous slide looked at purpose only being 7%. I'm thinking, well, you know, everybody's, if you're looking at the needs, you know, we've slid back right down to physical survival, security. Will I have a job? What's happening next? Is the business going to collapse? So, I mean, whilst, linking it to Stephen's comments around, you know, the trust and those, the top three that are often there in crisis, but always there, it's still keep doing that, but maybe within, again, the context and the understanding of people's experience, where many people have dropped down to that, you know, all I want to know is got a job, and that's where the personal versus the collaborative approach, or the, you know, the individual over the collective. So it's really quite interesting how all of this links together, and so it is about how can we just be real in our conversations, be, you know, open and authentic, because also the leaders are in a position where that's a moving, shifting sands for them as well, and so often they don't have anything to convey. But I guess acknowledging that they're all in a similar boat. So again, being open, communicating what they can, just checking in, perhaps more time to check the good old, you know, are you okay? What are people dealing with from a personal but also work perspective? What needs to happen? So that connection and communication, you know, so that people don't feel so isolated, not so alone.
Yeah, so we have to work out a way then, by the sound of it, we have to work out a way of how we move from our own issues and self-interest, don't we? To still collaborate and connect is sort of what you're saying.
So it's that compassion and understanding, I think,
Yeah.
really strong, that care, the communication, all of the above.
And as we say, it's not just the scarcity that, you know, and security that threatens that at the moment. Energy, and it's really interesting that our energy levels, you know, as Sylvia was saying in Melbourne, you know, how do you get out of bed again in the morning, you know, when you thought you were, you know, seeing the end and now you're not. So it says a lot too, doesn't it, around how important it is for us to have those strategies to invest in that individually and collectively, because they're going to be a high threat, not just the scarcity but and fear, but that can be a real threat to people not standing up and looking out rather than looking in. Anyone else? So they're great observations. And a couple of others before we close in a moment.
Nancy's put in the chat that need to acknowledge that there is no going back, that it's not an option, that there's a new normal, and trust is needed in navigating that.
And it's almost, I'm not even sure whether there's a new normal, there's a next normal and a next normal and a next normal, isn't there? That we're never really going to be there, I don't think. We're never really going to be in this new era. We're just going to be in a transitioning, an uncertain transitioning, which is really uncharted territory on so many levels. So thank you, everyone. Anyone, you want to make a closing comment, Stephen, on any of that?
Yeah, it's just around the values and advising them which values they should focus on. I'm more interested in helping them have a conversation to understand each other's values and understand each other's perspectives, and then just with questions helping them to really go into the depths of which values would really help their organisation. And often many of these things do come up, and just helping them to dive deeper into those conversations, but also across the organisation and listening to what are the stories people are telling about the predominant values that are taking place within the organisation. I guess it's that whole process of discovery, and working out really what are the values that are living within the organisation.
Absolutely. So that word advising is a wrong word, because it's actually about discovery, and it's about collective discovery. And what we'll be saying today, it's a discovery with the planet in mind.
And Kat, I just, you know, with the values, I mean, people have got different reactions to values, and as you said before, you often go to organisation, you see the, you know, the usual list there. But I guess, you know, and how you talk about values at this point in time is really then what does it look like in practice? What is, you know, the really translation into behaviours, because, you know, the trust, I mean, well, what does that look like? What is it within our context, within our little business? What does that look like to you? And having those conversations to really sort of say, well, you know, we can say, yes, communication is important, or trust, but, you know, checking with each person then, given that we know for most people that's important, you know, what do you want me to be doing more of or less of to actually convey that? And so people are actually putting them into practice rather than just saying, well, we're just supposed to trust, or we're supposed to just communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to make them practical actions that are relevant to their context, don't you? Otherwise they mean absolutely diddly squat. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. We will put the recording up on resilience.tv. We're also going to put we'll do a little bit of a blog with the survey results. So, you know, if you wanted to go back and have a look at any of that, probably be a couple of days before we get that up. If you have any colleagues who might be keen to come, we've certainly got Stephen's running one this evening. My colleague Viv is running one in Australia this evening, and we have Anne and Delaney and Sarah, who are running some in North America, and we've got some happening in Europe as well. So lots of opportunity to do that. So I hope that you have a wonderful World Values Day for those who are in the day, and for those who've got it tomorrow, I hope you have a wonderful World Values Day tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kathryn.
Thank you. See you, Sylvia.
Bye.
See you, Delaney. Good luck with your